The journey begins on the sparkling waters of the Mediterranean Sea, where a wooden vessel glides across waves the color of polished lapis. The ship sways gently with each rise and fall of the tide, its sails shifting and snapping in the wind while the rhythmic creak of oars fills the air. From the cabin, the open shutters frame an endless expanse of foam-tipped water, shimmering in golden sunlight as if the sea itself were alive and whispering. The sharp tang of salt drifts into the room, cooling passengers weary from travel. You are one of many voyagers bound for the thriving city of Rhodes on its sunlit island. To the ancient Greeks, this island was sacred ground, a place forever tied to the god of the sun, Helios. Its very name came from the sea nymph Rhoda, Helios's beloved. Rich and influential, Rhodes owed its prosperity largely to its strategic location, nearly equidistant from the island of Crete, the southern Greek mainland, and the Anatolian coast, which centuries later would be known as Turkey. At the northern tip of the island lay the capital's bustling harbor, a natural stopping point for fleets passing between Greece and Asia Minor. Yet the island's history was not always tranquil. For decades, wars had scarred the region. After Alexander the Great's untimely death in 323 BCE, when he left no heir, his former generals divided his empire among themselves, and three great factions emerged. Egypt came under the Ptolemies, Persia fell to the Seleucids, and Asia Minor was claimed by the Antigonids. Rhodes, determined to preserve its independence, maintained neutrality, though its friendship with Egypt unsettled Antigonus, who feared that alliance. By 305 BCE, Antigonus resolved to crush Rhodes before it could become a greater threat. He dispatched his son Demetrius with a massive force of 40,000 men to besiege the city. In contrast, the defenders numbered barely 7,000. Still, their spirit held firm. Beside you on the ship sits a man named Leandros, a native merchant of Rhodes returning home after travels abroad. With the enthusiasm of one who has lived through turbulent times, he recounts the siege. Demetrius attempted every possible method to break the defenders' resistance. Yet the islanders repelled each attack, and crucially, supply ships slipped through the blockade, keeping Rhodes alive. Leandros describes, with awe still clear in his voice, the colossal siege engine Demetrius ordered into being. Known as the Helepolis, the taker of cities, this monstrous tower, plated with iron and bristling with 16 catapults, was unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. It stood nearly 40 meters tall and 20 meters wide, so heavy that 3,000 men working in shifts strained to push it forward. Though Leandros had been a child at the time, the vision of that towering engine rolling against the city walls remained etched in his memory. Yet even such a weapon failed to conquer Rhodes. Years later, in 280 BCE, the island erected something even grander than that engine of war. A statue so immense that it would forever alter the imagination of mankind. Crafted of bronze, Helios the sun god now stood guard upon a hill near the harbor, gleaming above the rooftops and dazzling all who gazed upon him. As Leandros speaks, you glimpse the colossal figure in the distance. Your ship hugs the shoreline, and there, rising like a mountain of burnished metal, stands the bronze god himself. He is half-draped in a flowing toga tied at his waist, one hand gripping the cloth, the other lifted as though shading his eyes from his own blinding light. Upon his head rests a radiant crown, spikes jutting outward like beams of sunlight. Every ray of the Mediterranean sun dances across his surface, turning him into a vision of light incarnate. No tale could have prepared you for the overwhelming sight. Visitors around you stand transfixed in astonishment, their mouths parted in silent reverence. Even Leandros, who has seen this figure countless times before, watches with quiet satisfaction at your reaction. He explains that the Colossus was born of victory. After a year-long siege, Demetrius finally conceded defeat. The Rhodians, though vastly outnumbered, had persevered. When reinforcements from Egypt arrived, the invaders withdrew. Rhodes collected the abandoned siege engines and weapons, melted down the iron and bronze, and with the silver profits, amounting to some 300 talents, commissioned the grand statue of their patron god. Your vessel docks at last, and you step onto the stone jetty of the harbor. The city of Rhodes spreads before you like a jewel beneath the blazing sky. Narrow cobblestone lanes climb the hillsides, lined with terracotta-roofed villas. From balconies, citizens recline lazily, basking in the warmth. Fountains bubble at street corners, courtyards overflow with flowers, and statues decorate public squares. Amidst it all, white marble temples rise proudly, adorned with columns and triangular pediments that gleam in the sun. And above everything towers Helios, a beacon of bronze whose crown seems to graze the very sun itself. Leandros offers to guide you to the statue. He is heading that way to reunite with his family and promises to share what he knows of its construction. His cheerful spirit lightens your steps as you wander through the harbor district, weaving among warehouses and bustling markets. Merchants cry out their wares: trinkets for travelers, fruits and honey cakes, amphorae of wine. One of the vendors happens to be Leandros' cousin, who greets you warmly and insists you share refreshments. At a small round table, you savor a layered pastry filled with nuts and dripping with golden honey, washing it down with a goblet of wine. The sweetness revives you after the voyage, and you thank him sincerely for his generosity. Reinvigorated, you and Leandros continue uphill. The road winds past marble fountains and fragrant gardens, through neighborhoods alive with priests, politicians, and visitors from distant lands. Leandros' voice carries with enthusiasm as he tells of the statue's creation. The master sculptor chosen was Chares of Lindos, a pupil of Lysippos, who once served as Alexander the Great's personal sculptor. The project consumed 12 years of labor. First came the marble pedestal 5 meters high, prepared on the grassy summit. Then workers dug immense casting pits for the bronze plates. These were fixed to an iron framework, filled with stone blocks for stability. Earthen ramps encircled the figure, allowing craftsmen to ascend higher and higher as the god took form. Leandros recalls how, as a boy, he watched in frustration when the ramps obscured the statue from view. Yet when the scaffolding was finally removed, the reveal was breathtaking. The sun god stood unveiled, muscles gleaming, form magnificent, far more beautiful than any engine of war. Celebrations erupted across the island. Music, dance, offerings, and poetry all in honor of the radiant deity. Now, climbing the same hill, you feel the scale of Helios growing with each step. The statue soars more than 30 meters high, 70 cubits, as Leandros proudly notes, not including the pedestal. From afar it is grand. Up close it is overwhelming. Even the splendid temples appear diminished in its shadow. As you walk, the island enchants your senses. The sea breeze grows stronger, rich with salt and tinged with the resinous scent of pine, the sweetness of blooming flowers, the tang of ripening fruit. The sun warms your skin while your linen tunic flutters lightly in the wind. Every sound, the patter of sandals on stone, the cries of gulls wheeling above, feels like part of a grand symphony. At last, the path opens, and Helios dominates the horizon. Visitors ahead appear like children at his feet, so immense is the figure. The Greek word colossus was born for this statue, and from it all future giants of history would take their name. Rhodes itself embraced the title, its people calling themselves Colossians. The statue not only honored victory but transformed the island's destiny. Rhodes blossomed into a center of learning and culture. Schools of philosophy, rhetoric, and science flourished. A guild of sculptors trained in dramatic Hellenistic style rose to prominence, inspired by Chers's audacity. Word of the bronze giant spread across seas, and travelers from distant kingdoms began visiting solely to behold it. This early form of tourism enriched the city, filling its streets with foreign voices, exotic foods, and new music. Standing at the base, you raise your hand to shield your eyes, echoing the god's own pose. The bronze gleams so brilliantly it appears alive. Leandros, beside you, smiles and says softly that he must leave you here for now, to reunite with his family. He promises to return and bring you to his home, where his wife will prepare a meal and a bed as though you were kin. Alone, you study the colossal figure in silence. Every detail astounds, the lifelike folds of fabric, the defined muscles that seem capable of movement, the radiant crown blazing like fire. It is no wonder that poets will immortalize this wonder among the 7 marvels of the ancient world. Yet its life will be brief. Earthquakes, ever the threat of the region, will topple the Colossus after only 54 years. Though kingdoms across the Mediterranean will offer to rebuild it, the Rhodians, fearing divine disfavor, will leave the fragments scattered on the hillside. For 8 centuries, those fragments will lie there, fingers larger than men, bronze limbs immense beyond belief. Visitors will flock to marvel at the ruins, wrapping their arms around Helios's massive thumb, though none will ever span it fully. Only in later centuries will the pieces be melted and sold. Yet by then the Colossus had already transcended reality. Legends grew, weaving fact with fantasy. Some imagined the gods straddling the harbor, torch raised like a lighthouse. No evidence supports this, yet the image persists, inspiring later monuments. Most famously the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor, whose solar crown and raised torch echo the ancient sun god. Poets even called her the new Colossus, carrying forward the name across millennia. And so, though the original bronze no longer stands, its spirit endures. Rhodes thrives still, its beaches and harbors filled with travelers drawn by the same sunlight that once glistened on Helios's form. The Colossus exists now in imagination as much as in history, a wonder both real and eternal. As you recline on the grass at the statue's base, lulled by the rhythm of waves and the caress of sea air, your eyes drift closed. In that moment, you understand why the people of Rhodes built their bronze god, not merely as a monument of war, but as a radiant symbol of endurance, pride, and the eternal embrace of the sun. You linger in the statue's shadow until the sunlight softens and the day begins to turn the color of warm honey. Footsteps murmur around you. Pilgrims and travelers drift past with faces lifted, as if the mere act of looking upward might draw some courage down into their hearts. The bronze god remains unwavering, rays of the crown like rigid sunbeams, while the sea beyond the hill keeps breathing in a steady rhythm, as though the whole island were a chest slowly rising and falling. Leandros returns exactly as he promised, now at last, walking with that relaxed, almost musical pace that seems native to this place. He greets you with the open warmth of a kindly old neighbor and tells you his wife will be delighted to set another place at the table. No hesitation whatsoever colors his voice. Hospitality here is not a custom to be discussed, but a reflex felt in the bones. You descend the hill together, the cobbles warming your sandals. Vendors are closing their stalls, tying cords around jars, wrapping figs in leaves, brushing stray petals from tabletops. The harbor loosens into evening. Boats rock like cradles, and the masts draw harpstrings against the sky. A fisherman with weather-darkened hands lifts a small basket and offers you a taste of olives marinated in citrus and wild herbs. They are bright and briny, little bursts of sea and sun, and you thank him while Leandros laughs softly at your delighted expression. His home hides behind a trellis heavy with vine leaves. The courtyard smells of thyme and cooling stone. Inside, lamplight gathers in the curves of clay pitchers and along the edges of a carved chest. His wife, Dion, has the bustling grace of someone who has orchestrated many reunions. She ushers you to a bench near a low cedar table and presses a cup into your hands. The wine is watered in the local style, scented with a whisper of resin. His gentleness suits the hour. Dion's mother, gray, spry, and keen-eyed, appears with bread whose crust crackles faintly, as though it still remembers the oven's fire. She calls you dear traveler, then insists you eat more than courtesy would normally allow, which you do with grateful zeal. Bowls arrive. Lentils seasoned with vinegar and mint, cucumber drizzled in tart goat's milk, charred fish with a squeeze of bitter orange, honey cheese so soft it leans against the spoon. This is not abundance for display. It is abundance because love, when it is honest, rarely measures. So much is this so that you feel your shoulders loosen without your permission. Conversation finds its own tempo. Leandros's children appear from a corner, small, bright-eyed, still sandy-kneed from some late game, and perch like sparrows at the edge of listening. They want to hear about the ship, about the gulls, about the way the great statue looks from up close. You give a child's answer that is not childish, that the god is too large for a single glance, and the best way to see him is to walk all the way around in silence and let his shape be stitched together inside your head. The children accept this solemnly, as if you have given them a secret map. When questions are sated and the bowls stand half empty but entirely satisfying, Leandros lowers his voice, not for drama but reverence. He speaks of the night the statue's ramps came down. He was young, almost a boy, and the whole hill had been layered for years with earth and scaffolding, a cocoon hiding the god. When the earth was carted away, the bronze emerged like an enormous creature shedding its shell. He remembers a hush falling, wide and complete, the kind of hush that makes even a cough feel like a sacrilege. Then the singing began. Not loud, not raucous. A rising ribbon of voices that seemed to twine around the god's ankles and climb, climb, climb. Dion nods along, familiar with this story and yet not tired of it. She adds a detail. The day after the unveiling, old women carried garlands before sunrise and tucked them into crevices of the marble stage, and the dew made every petal glitter. It looked, she says, like the gods stood upon the lip of a shallow lake made of stars. The kindly old grandmother, who until now has listened with amusement, clears her throat for attention. She tells you how the bronze plates were poured and joined. Wax models first, shaped carefully with tiny tools. Then the clay molds, baked until the wax fled and left a cavity. Then the metal, bronze that had been copper-kissed by just enough tin, poured in gleaming streams while men worked bellows with the stubborn rhythm of people who intend to finish what they have started. She speaks not like a scholar but like a witness, and you understand that the island remembers not only with books, but with mouths and hands. Later, fatigue finds you, but sleep does not rush. It approaches with dignity. Dion shows you to a small room where the bed smells faintly of lavender stuffed into its straw ticking. A curtained window overlooks the courtyard where grape leaves whisper against the lattice. A clay jug stands ready with cool water. You lie down, and the house breathes. Boards creak lightly. A nightjar clicks in the dark. Someone laughs just once and then not again. Your last thought before falling into the slow well of rest is not philosophical, not grand. It is simply this: the bronze god waits up there in moonlight, and somehow the thought makes you feel protected. Morning gathers itself like a soft cloak laid across the shoulders of the island. You wake to the scrape of broom bristles and the quiet clatter of cups in the courtyard. Dion's mother places a fig in your palm, split to show its crimson heart. Now at last, breakfast, she says, with triumph out of all proportion to such a small fruit, and you adore her for it. Leandros proposes a walk that is not a walk at all so much as a thread through the fabric of how things are made. He wishes to show you a workshop where bronze is still cast, smaller works, of course. Household gods, lampstands, handles, but where the echoes of techniques used for the great statue ring clear as a struck bell. The workshop crouches behind a lane perfumed with sun-warm laurel. Inside, the air holds that particular mix of earth, faint smoke, and metal that smells like the making of intentions. A sculptor with arms corded by years of labor greets Leandros as an old friend. He introduces himself as Sabios, but insists you call him Sabios the Stubborn, because he refuses to believe there is any shape that cannot be coaxed from metal with patience enough. He lays out the process for you, no simplification whatsoever, no skipping of steps. First, wax. He rolls it between his palms until it relaxes, then pinches, smooths, warms, and sharpens it into an arm for a small figure. He shows how a hair-thin tool can chisel lines to suggest a tendon or the tender fold at the base of a thumb. Do not replace a description with a name, he warns. If you say hand, it tells me almost nothing. If you show me the little hollow where a pulse hides, then I know the living hand. Next, the clay mold. Layered in slips, strengthened with cords, vented with delicate reeds. Then the firing, which is not a violence but a persuasion. Heat is invited to do its work slowly, so the clay will not crack and the wax will leave with dignity. You cannot hurry in absence, Sabios says with a grin. He stokes the furnace, explains alloys with a patience that would make a schoolmaster proud, and when the crucible glows, he and a young apprentice pour. The bronze runs like sunlight liquefied, eager, quick, perilous. Sweat beads at their temples. The mold accepts the metal, hums a note too low for the ear but felt in the bones. When the casting cools, Sabios breaks the mold and laughs. A bright boy's laugh trapped in an older man's chest. He buffs the little figure with pumice, burnishes it to a calm glow, and sets it in your hands. Not to keep, he winks, but to feel. The weight is out of proportion to its size, as though it contains a concentrated portion of gravity. You understand, in that instant, how a city might decide to make a god from the same stubborn substance, so that their hope would not be a dream, but a weight that could resist wind and weather. Outside, the day ripens. Leandros leads you to a quiet square where an elderly scribe has set up a table beneath the shade of a plane tree. Scrolls lie in careful stacks, sealed with simple twine. The scribe, Philin by name, with eyes that seem to read a page even when closed, offers accounts written by travelers who visited after the earth shook the god from his pedestal. He will not shorten their words for you. He prefers, instead, to read aloud passages that take their time. He reads of fingers longer than ordinary statues are tall, of tourists wandering between bronze ridges like children walking in the furrows of a plowed field. He reads of people attempting, laughing, failing, to embrace the fallen thumb. He reads, too, of silence. Those moments when even the most talkative felt a hush lower upon them at the sight of greatness undone. The scribe's voice does not wobble, yet you hear the tensile thread of feeling run through it, the way a bowstring hums even before the arrow flies. Not any word whatsoever in those accounts suggests a harbor-straddling giant holding a torch like a lighthouse. The picture so loved in later centuries lives more in yearning than in evidence. Philin taps the margin where a careful note explains that scholars infer a hillside setting, a saluting hand near the brow, a solar crown whose spokes turn the head into a small sun. Imagination is a loyal servant, he murmurs, but a dangerous master. You wander after that, letting the city present its ordinary marvels. A potter's stall where a child paints spirals with a tongue between her teeth, unwilling to accept a wobbly curve. An astronomer showing a boy how a shadow crawls across a dial, explaining that time is not a thing that falls from the sky but something the sun draws, steady as breath, upon the earth. A small shrine where a woman ties a ribbon and does not pray aloud, perhaps because some requests are stitched from privacy. At noon, shade gathers under a colonnade like cool water pooling. Leandros suggests the public baths and you accept, uncertain, then grateful. The water shoulder warm, then cooler, then bracing. You emerge both drowsy and alert, the paradox that true rest always manages to achieve. A vendor sells you a wedge of sesame cake that crunches like first frost. You save a bite for later, an entirely unnecessary act of restraint that feels noble beyond its scope. Afternoon leans toward evening. You climb the hill again, the familiar path growing new under different light. A group of schoolchildren listens to their teacher recite lines that float like ribbons of smoke. A traveling poet begins to sing, and the melody threads through the cypresses. You do not hurry. Nothing here hurries unless it is already late and ashamed. Near the summit stands a man with a scar like a thin river across his forearm. He wears it without apology. You might have passed him, but his eyes hold the watchfulness of someone who has stood too long on walls, peering at horizons that sometimes bring sails and sometimes bring trouble. He introduces himself as Myron, once a runner during the siege. Not a hero by headline, he insists, but a stubborn pair of feet. He carried messages in darkness, his body a courier of hope. He says he was never brave, not even a single day, but he did what he knew in his bones needed doing. When he speaks of the statue, he does not mention craft or technique. He says only that when it appeared, he felt a weight lift from his ribs that he had not known was there. You stand together, strangers briefly braided by a view. The bronze glows, no longer the sharp blaze of morning, not yet the obscurity of night. A soft, forgiving light. The god's hand shadows his brow. The crown catches little fires. A swallow dives and scribbles its quick line across the air, as if editing the day. Myron asks, half teasing, whether you will leave believing the god once straddled the harbor with his legs as tall as towers. You smile and answer that harbor legends make lovely stories, but the hill feels truer beneath your feet. He nods, satisfied. Truth has the good manners to be where you are standing, he says, then wishes you calm seas whenever you next sail. Dusk unfurls. Lamps come alive one by one like small, deliberate stars. You circle the marble stage the way one might circle a lake, and each angle rewrites the god's profile into a new sentence. You kneel and press your palm to the cool stone ledge. It returns no explanation whatsoever, only a steady, indifferent cold that paradoxically comforts you. The god does not need your belief to stand. Therefore, your belief feels lighter, freer, uncoerced. Behind you, the city exhales. Doors closing, sandals scuffing. A last laugh tossed into the air and left to fade. Up here, the breeze combs the grass and leaves behind orderly lanes, as though preparing the hill for sleep. You think of Sabios the stubborn and his calm bronze, of Philin and the careful notes in a margin, of the kindly old grandmother who made a victory of breakfast. The island's memory does not seem trapped in stone or metal. It walks around inside people and comes out when someone asks for water, or help, or a story. Leandros finds you again. He moves like someone who belongs to a place, which is to say without uncertainty of where to put his feet. He carries a small wrapped bundle. Leftover bread, a wedge of cheese, a few olives. For the walk back, he says. Or for later, when later always surprises you. You share a quiet grin that needs no translation. Together you begin the descent, pausing halfway to look back. The bronze god stands like a thought the island decided to keep. He is not alive, and yet he lives. He is not a lighthouse, and yet he guides. He is not a man, and yet he wears the marks of hands that made him. Hands that learned to ask heat for favors and clay for patience and time for mercy. Everything that matters in that statement resists haste. As you cross into lamplight streets, a young girl runs past, arms flung wide, pretending to be a gull. Her father calls after her with mock sternness. She ignores him with the good faith of children who trust that love will always catch up. The smell of supper trails from open windows, the ordinary miracle repeating itself house by house. You understand with sudden clarity that the Colossus was never principally a boast. It was a pledge that within the brief span between earthquakes and wars, people will eat together, sing in low voices, carry garlands at dawn, and set another place at the table for whoever arrives with tired eyes and a hopeful story. You do not hurry the last steps. Why would you? Even the shadows here seem to know where they belong. When you glance back one final time, the god has become a silhouette, a dark certainty against a darkening sky. If fear visits you in years to come, you will remember this outline and find that part of your breath still takes its slow measure from a hillside that refused to lean. Night closes gently, kindly, without locking anything away. The island keeps breathing. The bronze does what bronze does, endures. It does not speak, and yet it answers, not with words at all, but with weight, with height, with a steadfastness that needs neither applause nor explanation. Tomorrow may bring markets and ferry schedules, letters to write, a decision to make, coin to count, sandals to mend. But tonight belongs to that steady outline, to the shared memory of people who carried water up ramps and songs down the hill. You carry your little bundle of food, your larger bundle of impressions, and the knowledge that in a world which often insists on spectacle, it is astonishing how quietly greatness can rest. You step through Leandros's gate. The vine leaves rattle a soft greeting. From somewhere within the house, a small voice, sleepy, indignant, insists it is not tired whatsoever, which means, of course, that sleep has already conquered. You smile into the lamplight, grateful beyond measure for a day that felt like a door opening rather than a task completed. And above, on the hill, the god keeps watch. Not a guardian in armor, not a torch-bearing sentinel, but a figure with one hand raised to shade his eyes, as if even light needs help to see the world clearly. You do not pray. You do not need to. You simply let your breath join the island's breath, and in that simple joining you understand now indeed that some wonders are less about being seen than about teaching the heart how to see. Morning light brushes the hill with a pale gold when you climb once more to the place where the bronze god stands. The statue is still whole in this moment of history, and yet Leandros reminds you gently that time holds no promises. He speaks not with dread but with a calm acceptance, as if greatness itself is always destined to be brief, and that brevity only sharpens its brilliance. He tells you of omens. Islanders whisper that the earth beneath roads sometimes groans in its sleep, shifting with hidden force. The city knows well that earthquakes belong to this land as much as sunshine or sea breeze. Someday, he says, the Colossus may face the same fate as every mortal being, to fall. You study the bronze frame, solid, gleaming, unyielding, and cannot imagine it breaking. Yet Leandros insists, even bronze carries the memory of fire. What fire made, earth may unmake. The years slip forward in his telling, and you imagine them unfolding. The statue standing proud for barely 54 summers before the ground shakes, violent and merciless. Roofs crack, walls tumble, fountains split, and the bronze god, unshakable in spirit but not in legs, bends at the knees and topples. He crashes upon the hillside, scattering fragments so vast that a single finger dwarfs men like trees overshadow saplings. Offers of aid pour in from distant kingdoms. Egypt, Seleucia, and even states far west of Greece declare their willingness to rebuild the fallen god. But the Rhodians, cautious and reverent, refuse. For them, the earthquake is not simply a natural disaster, it is a message. They fear to insult the deity by defying what seems like divine will. When the Oracle of Delphi warns against raising the Colossus again, their decision becomes final. The bronze remains where it has fallen, and there it lies for centuries. 800 years of silence and sunlight. 800 years of children weaving through enormous limbs, of poets carving verses about the noble ruin, of travelers wrapping arms around the giant's thumb and laughing at their futility. The god sleeps in pieces, but even in brokenness he commands awe. You walk through Leandros' story as though you were one of those future pilgrims. The hillside is green, wildflowers nudging against cold bronze plates. A bird perches upon a colossal elbow, chirping as if this were any ordinary perch. Yet to you, the contrast is almost unbearable. The small life of a bird upon the memory of a god. Later centuries change rulers but never erase the myth. Romans march into Rhodes, their standards bright against the sea wind. They see the ruins and speak of them with reverence, folding the story into their own libraries and scrolls. Then come the Byzantines, guardians of a Christian empire, who view the broken sun god as a relic of a vanished age but still too grand to ignore. After them, Arab conquerors arrive in the 7th century, and at last the fragments of bronze are sold, melted, reshaped into coins and tools. Yet even when the physical form is gone, the image remains. What fascinates you is how imagination grows stronger than stone. With every century, new versions of the Colossus appear in memory. Some swear the statue once straddled the harbor itself, legs like towers, torch aloft to guide ships. There is no truth in it, but truth has never been enough to anchor legend. The harbor god becomes a lighthouse in the stories, brighter and grander than any bronze could ever be. The echo stretches forward into ages yet unborn. A poet centuries later will call a new statue the new Colossus. She will speak of a goddess clad in a robe, lifting a torch for exiles and dreamers who arrive by sea. That statue will rise not in Rhodes but in a harbor across the world, a gift from one nation to another. Yet in its crown of sun rays, in its colossal stance, the shadow of Helios lives again. Standing on the hillside with Leandros, you understand the paradox. The Colossus existed for only 54 years in its full glory, and yet its reputation will outlive empires. In its fall, it became immortal, not because bronze is eternal, but because wonder is. Wonder leaps from lips to parchment, from ruins to imaginations, across languages, continents, and centuries. As twilight gathers, you sit upon the grass where someday pieces of bronze will rest. You imagine yourself both here and there, both in the 3rd century BCE when the god stands tall, and in future centuries when only ruins remain. The same wind touches both versions of the hill. The same sun crowns both the standing figure and the fallen limbs. And within you grows a realization. The Colossus is not only a statue. It is a lesson that greatness can be brief yet endless, fragile yet eternal, destroyed yet indestructible. The waves roll steady against the shore below, the everlasting song of the sea. Children laugh in the distance, their voices rising like sparks. Leandros's words linger. Even bronze carries the memory of fire. You add your own silent thought, and memory itself is fire, spreading from mind to mind, warming ages that will never see the original flame. You close your eyes and let the story rest in you like embers in a hearth. The Colossus of Rhodes stands, falls, lies broken, and rises again in dreams. And perhaps that is the truest wonder of all. The ship leaves Rhodes behind, its sails swollen with a brisk wind that smells of salt and promise. Days pass across a vast and shifting horizon, and at last the prow cuts through the waters of Egypt. Here the coastline stretches long and low, its sand shimmering like molten glass under the merciless sun. Beyond the dunes rises a city of renown, Alexandria, jewel of the Ptolemaic kingdom, where scholars argue beneath colonnades and merchants barter in every language known to the sea. But before you glimpse the libraries, the palaces, or the harbors thick with masts, your eyes are seized by something else. Out upon the small island of Pharos, just offshore, stands a tower so immense that sky and stone seem stitched together. The Alexandrians call it simply the lighthouse. Yet even from this distance, you sense it is not merely a tool for guiding ships, but a declaration carved into the horizon. Here is a city that will never be lost. The tower dazzles. Its lower square base is massive, rising like a fortress, built of pale stone blocks fitted so precisely that the seams vanish. Above it, the structure changes shape, narrowing into an octagonal shaft, then again into a slender cylinder crowned by a flame that crackles day and night. In the glare of daylight, polished bronze mirrors capture the sun and hurl it far across the sea. At night, enormous fires roar in bronze braziers, their light magnified by reflective panels until it shines like a second moon. Sailors whisper that the beam reaches 50 miles or more, a ribbon of brightness drawn across the darkness. Beside you on the deck, a sailor named Ariston, lean, sun-leathered, with the calm eyes of one who has trusted his life to tides, leans against the rail and begins to speak. He tells you of the tower's birth. After Alexander the Great's death, the city named for him became the beating heart of Egypt under the Ptolemies. Ships from every corner of the Mediterranean poured into its twin harbors. But reefs and shoals haunted the waters, and storms often smashed vessels against the coast. King Ptolemy Soter decreed that a beacon must rise on the island of Pharos to protect the lifeblood of trade. The task fell to a brilliant architect, Sostratus of Cnidus, whose genius would leave a mark on the world as lasting as stone can bear. Ariston's voice carries pride, though Egypt is not his homeland. For sailors, he says, the lighthouse is not Egypt's gift, it is humanity's gift. He describes how Sostratus inscribed not the king's name but his own, hidden beneath plaster, so that when centuries eroded the covering, truth would gleam through. Sostratus of Cnidus, to the savior gods, for the safety of sailors. It is an act as bold as the tower itself. Your ship glides into Alexandria's eastern harbor, where the lighthouse commands the entrance. Even as you disembark, you cannot stop staring upward. Its height is staggering, over 100 meters, so tall that clouds sometimes brush its crown. Merchants unloading crates pause to glance up with the same reverence as pilgrims at a temple. Children point and laugh, yet even their laughter is tinged with awe. You step onto the bustling quay, where the air is a mixture of fish, spices, and the sharp tang of tar. Alexandria is alive with noise. Vendors calling out figs and pomegranates, scholars in animated debate, donkey carts rattling across flagstones. But over it all, visible from every angle, stands the tower, serene, unshaken, a calm sentinel above human chaos. A guide offers to lead you across a causeway to the island of Pharos. He is a local named Menes, with skin darkened by years of sun and an eloquence that makes every fact sound like a story. As you walk, he tells you of the tower's 3 stages: the massive square foundation, the octagonal middle tier, and the cylindrical beacon at the top. Each section is bound by staircases and ramps so broad that horses and mules can climb them, hauling fuel for the eternal flame. Crossing the causeway, the sea crashes on both sides. Menes points to half-submerged rocks that once claimed ships without mercy. Before the tower, he says, these waters were a graveyard. Now, even in storm, sailors see the light and live. He speaks with a reverence usually reserved for gods. And perhaps this tower, though crafted by hands, has become divine in its purpose. At the base, the scale astonishes you anew. The stones are vast, fitted with such skill that centuries of waves have not pried them apart. Carvings of protective deities watch over the entrances, their faces stern but comforting. Menes leads you into the tower, where the air cools and echoes with footsteps. Torches flicker along the walls, their smoke clinging to the high vaults. The climb begins. Spiral ramps curve steadily upward, wide enough for beasts of burden. You hear the steady thud of hooves, the grunt of laborers hauling firewood and resin. The higher you rise, the more Alexandria spreads beneath you. The great library's gleaming roof, the palaces, the endless maze of streets. Beyond them stretches the Nile Delta, green veins cutting through sand, and farther still the desert, an ocean of gold without end. At last you emerge near the summit. Here the fire roars, feeding on resinous wood, pitch and oil. Bronze mirrors taller than men angle outward, catching the flame's brilliance and flinging it far across the water. You step close, shielding your face from the heat, and glimpse the sea itself blazing with reflected light. It is as though the tower has taught the waves to glow. Menes lowers his voice. At night, when the fire is strongest, sailors say it looks like the very stars have come down to earth. They call it a gift from the gods, but we know it was built by men. And yet, what greater miracle is there than men who build as though they were gods? You stand in silence, humbled. The tower does not boast. It serves. It does not conquer. It protects. Unlike the Colossus of Rhodes, born of war and victory, the lighthouse exists to save, to shield, to light the way for strangers who may never know the names of those who built it. The wind tugs at your tunic, carrying the mingled scents of smoke and salt. You gaze outward, where the horizon burns with the last embers of daylight and the first shimmer of stars. Ships glide in, guided unerringly by the beacon. Sailors bow their heads as if in prayer, not to a deity, but to the flame itself. And in that moment you understand. Some wonders stand because humanity refuses to let the sea, or the dark, have the last word. The lighthouse of Alexandria gleams against the night, a steadfast eye that never blinks. Long after empires rise and crumble, long after rulers' names are forgotten, this tower will still be remembered, not for its power to awe, but for its power to guide. The river carries you eastward, its muddy waters glittering beneath a merciless sun. Palms bend over the banks, reeds whisper in the breeze, and the endless plains of Mesopotamia stretch away in shimmering waves of heat. Days melt into one another, until at last the city appears. Babylon, fortress of kings, crowned with towers and walls so vast that they seem to clasp the horizon itself. Even among such grandeur, one tale rises above all others. Travelers have spoken in hushed tones of a wonder hidden within these walls. A palace garden that hangs not upon the earth, but seems suspended in air, where trees grow upon terraces and vines pour downward like emerald waterfalls. Some dismiss the story as fantasy, a dream whispered into history. Yet you are here to see whether legend holds truth. A guide named Nabu, a kindly old man whose beard is as white as river salt, leads you through gates taller than ships' masts. He tells you of a king, Nebuchadnezzar, who built the gardens for his queen, a woman far from her mountain homeland. Longing for green valleys and forested slopes, she wept in the heat of Babylon. So the king, determined to soothe her sorrow, commanded that an entire mountain be raised from brick and stone, upon which her native landscape might be reborn. You walk through courtyards humming with voices, past processions of soldiers and priests, until Nabu gestures upward. There, above the palace walls, you see it. Terraces stacked one atop another, rising in tiers toward the sky. From each level spill cascades of greenery, cypress and cedar, fig and date, grapevine and rose. Water gleams as it trickles from unseen channels, dripping in silver threads into pools below. The air changes as you ascend. Where moments ago the sun baked mercilessly, here cool shade falls across your shoulders, sweetened by the scent of blossoms. Birds flutter between branches. Bees drift lazily among flowers. The sound of water is everywhere, gurgling, dripping, rushing. A music that drowns the clamor of the city beyond. Nabu explains the secret. A hidden system of pumps and screws lifts water from the Euphrates below, carrying it upward through shafts and channels. The river itself feeds the garden, so that trees flourish high above the earth, their roots cradled in deep beds of soil laid over vaulted stone chambers. The queen, he says, found her homeland here, reborn in the heart of Babylon. You pause beside a pool where lotus flowers float, their petals like cups of ivory. The breeze carries a mingled perfume, cedar resin, ripe figs, the honeyed breath of roses. It is a scent so rich that it feels like memory itself. You sit beneath a pomegranate tree, its branches heavy with fruit, and listen as Nabu speaks of visitors who gasp in disbelief. Some insist the gardens must be sorcery. Others call them the very ladder between earth and heaven. Yet not even the Babylonians agree on every detail. Some claim the gardens were built not by Nebuchadnezzar but by a later king. Others doubt they existed at all, saying they are but a poet's invention. Still, as you run your fingers along the damp stone, as petals fall into your hands and the water cools your skin, it is hard to believe in absence. Wonders do not always demand permanence. Sometimes their truth lies in the longing they inspire. Evening descends. The terraces glow in the fading light, vines gilded, fountains burning gold. From high above, Babylon spreads outward like a tapestry. Walls broad enough for chariots, gates painted with lions and dragons, temples rising in solemn pride. Yet your gaze always returns to the garden itself, where nature has been lifted into the sky, a mountain born of devotion. You realize in that moment that the hanging gardens are not only stone and root. They are a gesture of love made monumental, a promise carried into architecture. That sorrow can be eased, that absence can be filled, that even longing can grow into beauty. When night finally cloaks the city, lanterns gleam among the leaves, and the terraces shimmer as though stars have descended to rest upon the branches. You close your eyes, hearing the murmur of water and the whisper of leaves, and you understand why travelers, poets, and dreamers alike will carry this image through centuries. Whether the gardens endure in stone or only in memory, they have already achieved what every wonder must. They have entered the heart, where no ruin can reach them.